Hello and welcome to another episode of The Tigers Down Under. I'm your host as always, Alex, and with me I have Logan.
How you going?
And I've also got Brad.
Good evening.
It was probably the first performance of the season where we've not felt too good coming out of it. I mean, we had another loss against United, but that was a last gasp winner, so we sort of could take some positives out of it, but it was a bit tougher going against Arsenal in a 4-1 defeat. I'll start with you, Brad. What was your feeling coming out of that game?
I suppose it felt, by the end of the game, it felt like a reasonably typical Premier League game against a sort of top 6 or top 8 team. You know, we've seen these in the past. We looked good for a period of time, hung in for a little bit, and then eventually the class comes into it. I suppose the only frustration was the fact that, you know, obviously Jake Livermore picking up the red really did turn the game, I think. Yeah. Although Arsenal were obviously pressing and pretty dominant moving forward, we were absorbing it as we have been. And, the red card for me, just that's when the stomach dropped a couple of inches and thought, right, here we go.
Yeah, and I guess that is the positive to take out of it, was that we were passing the ball around quite well. Logan, how did you see it, and what was your thought on some of the goals that Arsenal managed to score?
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Brad. I thought that the Jake Livermore send-off, in many respects, killed the game for us. I think when you host a team like Arsenal or United or any of those bigger teams, you kind of need the bounce of the ball and the decisions to kind of work for you to get that momentum swing. And it just felt that it never came. As soon as that red card was shown, we were kind of dead and buried in many respects. I thought we fought well, and like you said, there were definitely passages of play where we were pretty decent, but at the end, I think that to highlight what happened is the Xhaka goal at the end. Probably showed the golfing class that just that kind of extra piece of quality that Arsenal had in the top drawer that we probably in a close game might not have occurred, but yeah, we were found out by one stroke.
When you have players who can come off the bench and score goals like that, I think it does show just where you sit in terms of class. I'm not one to sort of dwell on referees and then how they can affect games, but there were a few interesting moments out of the game that other referees and other commentators have sort of drawn on as issues with the performance from Roger East, and I just wanted to get your guys' takes on it. I mean, obviously the first one is that sending off for Jake that we've sort of talked about, and by the letter of the law, a player shouldn't be sent off for a handball unless it's denying a clear goal. So if he's standing on the goal line and he sort of bats the ball away or something like that, it's a definite straight red. But if it's just an accidental handball leading to a penalty, it's meant to just be a yellow. Jakupovic is standing right behind Jake in that situation, but do you think it was the correct decision by the ref to send him off? Do we think Jak was kind of maybe on his wrong side, or he wasn't going to get back for the shot, or do we see it as the right call?
No, definitely not. I think a yellow card and the penalty would have done the situation justice. I think because you can't 100% guarantee that Jak wasn't going to get to it. Or that it was certainly deliberate. I thought a yellow card would have done, yeah.
Yeah, and look, I'd agree 100%, mate. I mean, if you asked me at the time, I would have told you it wasn't even handball, but turning the bias hat around for a minute, it definitely wasn't a red card. And probably the showing thing for me was how some of the Arsenal, might have only been one play, but one or two of the Arsenal players sort of half consoled Livermore as he walked off, which to me showed that that's how harsh the decision was.
That's the other aspect of it in terms of him walking off the pitch. And I think they drew attention to it on the broadcast, but he wasn't even off the pitch when the penalty was taken. And that's an under-12 sort of mistake. I mean, I as a pretty amateur referee by anyone's standards, know that when the player gets red carded, you've got to basically make them walk to their car and out of the ground. You know, you can't have him trudging off the field as the penalty's taken. I think he even turns around to sort of look as Jak saves it, just to sort of see what the commotion is. So, and it's a strange one because you've got that fourth official there who should be pretty much in the ref's ear saying, well, hold on a second, we'll wait for the player to get off the field.
Yeah, look, maybe Roger even turned the earpiece off because he was getting plenty of advice at the time. But to me, it summed up the whole performance, is that the referee seemed to get carried away, both for and against us, throughout the game, just almost with sort of second-guessing his own decision-making. I mean, no one can dispute the fact that, okay, he's made it a clear penalty. Okay, he sent a player off. That's the talking point. The penalty still stands. It still would have stood.
Yeah.
But then it seemed like that was just a precursor to the rest of the match, where he was able to find free kicks that were a bit ticky-touch and then obviously not go anywhere near some of the more serious ones, and then leading to our penalty. It was just a comedy of errors by good old Roger.
The only other one that I wanted to touch on was the Cazorla non-sending off. And I've seen it sort of mentioned that it's a bit tougher for refs potentially to send off big club players, and I think we saw it really well in our previous Premier League season when I think it was Gary Cahill dived in the box against Chelsea, and he was already on a yellow card, and it was a blatant dive, but he didn't get sent off. And I think referees might be kind of a bit worried that if they send off a big-name player, that there's going to be more commotion made of it if they've made the wrong decision. And I think with Cazorla, you see him reach for his pocket. I think it's on the cynical tackle on Snodgrass, which is a yellow any day of the week. And he reaches for his pocket and then realizes that, oh, hang on, if I give him the yellow, he's actually going to get sent off. And he basically just gives him another warning. Was Cazorla a lucky man to stay on the pitch?
Incredibly. I was amazed at the end of the match to see that Cazorla was still there. I thought that was very suspect indeed.
Yeah, and look, it goes back to that sort of point we're discussing with Jake's decision. You know, he just seemed to get carried away, and like you said, Alex, I'm positive as well. I saw he was reaching for the card and then realised who it was.
Yeah,
and that to me summed up exactly what you're saying there. We've seen for years that these referees, well, sometimes they're half human. You actually think half the time that they know going into the game, all I've got to do is make sure that I'm not worldwide news.
Yeah.
So if I drop a red card on a Hull City player, then okay, they might get some press, but not much. But if I send an Arsenal player off, then FIFA will know about it, and with a World Cup coming up or a Euro coming up, I'll never get a gig again.
Yeah.
Not that I think Roger's going to be looking down that career path in a hurry, but yeah, I think it's the same. I think in any league in the world, the top teams do get, perceived preferential treatment on some of these key decisions, and amazingly how quick he pulled that red card out for Jake, and then yet he can't see past more than just one challenge in the second half is beyond me, but that's what we get, don't we?
Yeah, I wouldn't have been too disappointed to see Petr Cech get marched as well.
Exactly.
Well, I think the only thing with Cech I would say is that I think with the new interpretation of the rules is that if he's seen to be denying a goal-scoring opportunity, it's no longer a red card because the opportunity is restored by the fact that we get that penalty. So, which I don't mind as a rule change, to be honest, because it kind of changes it from being a double whammy to just a single whammy. That, if a player's through on goal and they're taken out, well, they still get their chance to score because they get the penalty out of it.
Yeah, a lot of that's you could almost argue in reverse for Jake's situation. Yeah. Well, they got the penalty. The thing that I do have one little problem with the rule, and not to digress too much, but it actually assumes that the penalty is a better option. And in some of these cases, some of these players are around the keeper with an open goal and get tapped. It's probably a rule that, no doubt it will be recycled in a different way, shape or form in 5 years' time or something.
To turn the attention back to the players, I suppose, we can look at some of their performances, and we've kind of alluded a bit to Yak with some good play with saving the penalty, but also some bad play, maybe with the first goal. I know people were quite critical of him for that. I was quite vocally supportive of him, but looking at replays, it is tough to see whether he should have managed to do better for that first goal in particular, with whether he can catch the cross or whether he palms it to a better position. The third goal, I wouldn't necessarily say was his fault too much, but the fourth one, people saying maybe he should have got a finger to it or something from it being hit from so far out, but he did do a lot right in the match, but he did a bit wrong. Do we see his position now coming under threat from Marshall?
I think from the moment Marshall was signed, Yak's position was under threat.
Do you think that's fair? Do you think it's fair that with Yak, they're basically looking for an excuse to bring Marshall in, but they wouldn't do the same if Marshall made a mistake?
I think that we are still sitting in a state of where we're surprised at just how much Yak has brought.
Yeah.
I think if you've watched him over the previous seasons, with the exception of that the Arsenal performance where he really kind of put himself on the map, we probably didn't realise how much of a keeper he genuinely was because of some of the mistakes and errors that had kind of seemed to rear their head over time when he had been called upon. Now that he seems to have had that kind of rich vein of form and seems to have strung some games together, he's really impressed. And whether he's warrants dropping because Marshall is the player that Marshall is and everybody knows he is, I'm not so sure. I would still stick with Yak.
Yeah, I feel sorry for the bugger because he was tarred with the rubbish brush pretty early on, and then to now sort of end up in a situation where he's shown that he can play Premier League football as a keeper, to now sort of have every bad game or a little mistake critique. But I mean, that's the league we're in. Probably the only thing, I agree with Logan, I don't think he deserves to be dropped, but at some stage Phelan's job is going to be to improve that side every week, so we're picking up and accumulating points. And amazingly, it's all going to come down to Phelan's choice. If he feels that Marshall's a safer bet, I don't think conceding the way we did against Arsenal is a hanging offence. I really think that see how we go when we're playing around the clubs that are in that bottom half and see how players are performing. But I sort of think with Logan, I'm right. I don't think he should be dropped just based on that one game.
And the other one who's sort of come in for a bit of criticism lately is Diomande, who was the player subbed off for Maguire when Livermore was sent off. I've been pretty critical of him in previous weeks, but to be honest, against Arsenal, he seemed to do a bit right. I remember there was a passage where he sort of, a good bit of footwork sort of opened up the play and let him feed the ball through to, I think it was Snodgrass for a decent shot. And he had a few other decent moments as well. And I know in previous weeks he's sort of given the ball away or he's had a loose first touch and that sort of thing, but he didn't look too bad. But you kind of get the sense that, I mean, Mbakani, when he came on, looked really strong and positive and really sort of got us moving forward and obviously won that penalty. Do we think maybe Mbakani has earned his way, has played his way into a starting spot?
I still think the risk is we probably haven't seen enough of Diomande, if we're being fair. Last season we probably didn't get to see all that much, and I think he has been relatively impressive from the start, as you mentioned, in a similar position to Yak and Marshall. Ever since Mbakani was signed, you would kind of suggest that Diomande was under threat. And I think that it will probably end up with Mbakani starting this weekend and Diomande getting the rest. But I'm still not sold on Diomande yet. I still think he's quite a decent player.
Yeah, I'd agree as well. And probably the thing that's going to really dictate it and probably is going to be sort of how Phelan feels we need to line up this week, because I think I agree with Alex. Diomande looked like he really put in a shift. He was trying to hold the ball up. For me, though, he was doing it almost in the wrong place on the park.
Yep.
He seemed to get a lot of the balls wide. I know he's been played in that sort of wider advancing role, but he sort of played to me like a real stick your bum out centre forward. And he was too far, almost at our halfway line doing most of his work, whereas we really needed that up towards the top line. But, coming up against another big side in the next game, it really just gets back to how Phelan's going to keep that shape.
And then finally, it's probably a bit tougher this week to pick out a top three for the players. But I'll start with you, Logan. Who did you see as your top three players on the pitch?
I thought Elmo was probably my pick from the.
He was very positive, wasn't he?
Yeah, it's just good to see him taking on plays again, back to his old self. I think he's one of the players that seems to be thriving at the moment. I thought Davies was good again, and you probably give it to Snodgrass as well. I thought he was pretty trying, but no real standouts. I thought.
Brad, did you have any additional players?
Yeah, look, probably it was a game of two halves, obviously, but I just thought Clucas again, the first half, the way he had that confidence to move that ball around, and not just that, there was a couple of positions there where he won balls in front of our back four and was so comfortable on the ball that he really reassured me that he's really got it. I know I've been a big fan of his all year, and probably in the second half, to be honest, I thought his last 25 minutes, 30 minutes were pretty poor, but I was pretty happy that, like Logan mentioned, Elmo really seemed to be confident enough that he's able to get around these players, and to me that's a really good sign, because if he's prepared to do it against Arsenal's pace, we should be really seeing it against some of the, well, let's call them slightly slower sides. But probably the only other one that I thought had a reasonable game. I thought Snodgrass has been putting in good shifts and continued to be pretty consistent again. So that would be my sort of three.
Yeah, I mean, Clucas, with some of his passing, his range of passing, I kind of expected it to be coming from Addleston. When he was spraying these passes left and right and hitting his targets, and it was incredibly impressive. And I think he was named man of the match at the ground, which just shows how much people were recognising his effort. I mean, it would have been easy, and I think it's usually the case at the KCOM that man of the match goes to the goal scorer or, someone who's done something quite flashy. So to see it going to someone like Lucas, who's obviously sitting there at the base of the midfield, is a true testament to how well he's been playing. The only other one I'd add, and it was only a brief cameo, but Ryan Mason had a decent display as well, and he was the one that played that great ball around the Arsenal defence to kind of set Mbakani loose, and hopefully he can sort of kick on from that and really come into the side and add a bit of creativity that we sort of lack a little bit, especially against sides like Burnley, where we kind of struggled to break them down with passes in that final third. So if he can come in and start kind of unlocking defences and giving us those goal-scoring opportunities going forward, that'd be great to see. We'll move on, and there hasn't been a whole lot to talk about off the pitch this week. I mean, the takeover talks are sort of rumbling along in the background, but the major one is with Mike Phelan, and I think in the post-match after the Arsenal game, he seemed to give his strongest indication yet that he was pretty close to signing on a permanent contract with the club. So I just wanted to ask you both, I'll start with you, Logan. What do you see as the key difference between Phelan and Bruce, and do you see this as a really positive sign going forward?
I think you almost answered it just then with the going forward part of your comment. I think Mike Phelan still does to me seem like he has a resolute defence despite the four goals that we conceded against Arsenal. But I just think that the positivity that we seem to be having in attack now, particularly on the counter, and just kind of the confidence on the ball seems to be a lot more evident at the moment. And regardless, I thought even in the last 20 minutes of the game against Arsenal, you always felt that we were a chance of scoring another one or two. And I thought that that's a real credit to the confidence that he seems to have instilled in the group. And the other thing is obviously the players have been quite vocal in their support and backing his appointment. So, he definitely seems to have the kind of qualities that we got used to in a Steve Bruce team, with a little bit more positivity in attack, I suggest.
What's your take on him, Brad?
Yeah, look, pretty much the same. I think at the turn of the year, I would have said, well, at the start of the season when Phelan obviously came into the role, I would have thought, okay, tactically, I think Phelan's got a bit more nous than Bruce. And I know that going back when Phelan first joined the club, he was really joined to effectively assist Bruce, and that was his strong play, knowing sort of the tactical side of the game. But obviously what's impressed me is the way he's pulled this group together, and they believe him, they understand him, and that sort of has really led, I believe, into some of these players. Effectively, some of these players are like brand new players. I mean, Clucas, we knew he had some talent, but gee whiz, tell me he's playing in the middle of the park every week, effectively controlling that sort of more central midfield, and you would have laughed at the end of last season. But he's doing it in a way that he does not look out of place. And I think Phelan's he's got a knack of getting the best out of the individuals. But probably the thing that I like the most, and this could actually be the thing that really helps us this season, we've had, at Premier League level anyway, we've had, Brownie years ago, who was an emotional cat. He really got carried away at times. And Brucey last year, there was times there where I don't believe the players really were engrossed in it, purely because you're looking at the sidelines and Steve Bruce isn't either. But Phelan has this sort of reservation about him that I like. He doesn't seem to be outspoken. He can smile, and I'm sure he can get pretty serious, but he's not that eccentric, both in the way he manages or personality-wise, and I actually like that. That creates a bit of stability that we probably haven't had in the Premier League with the managers we've had in the past.
The one thing I really like is, and something that really bothered me about Bruce, which I think he was doing right up until the time he left, was this constant talking down about the club and its stature and its size always used to frustrate me. So Bruce, coming into a Premier League season, would be constantly saying, oh, well, we're little old Hull, we'll try and compete, but we're up against the big boys now, and it's going to be tough, and it's going to be a battle. And you just think that if he's talking like that every single week, and if he's talking like that in training, it's got to be draining on the players. It's got to be sapping of their confidence that they can actually go out and compete. And I think it was Snodgrass in an interview, it might have been with The Guardian or it might have been in the Hull Daily Mail, where he said, with Phelan, we actually go out and believe we can win each week. And I think that's a huge difference in the playing group. And you just look at a club like Leicester, and if Ranieri had come into Leicester at the start of last season and said, right now, boys, we're a little club in a big league. We're going up against the big boys. We've just got to go out, defend against the big clubs. Maybe we can try and attack sometimes against the smaller clubs, but most of the time we're just going to play for a draw. They wouldn't have won the league. They would have come maybe 12th, 10th at their best if the players had still had that sort of form. But the fact that he clearly went out there and said, right, well, we've got these attacking assets. We've got these players who can play so brilliantly well. Let's let them play. And we've seen already with Snodgrass, we've seen with Clucas, when you play them in positions where they want to play and you let them thrive, all of a sudden they look like new players, like you're saying, Brad.
Yeah, and that's the key, Alex. You've hit it on the head, actually. These guys are guys that want to play up. They want to come into the Premier League and keep thriving and matching up. And obviously, we've still got players that we've bought from other clubs at different times. But the thing that actually impressed me with the signings we made, both Mason and especially Marshall more so as well, these guys who actually can see Hull as a place that can go up. Whereas a lot of the signings we've had at Premier League levels in the past, and probably Livermore aside because he's gone up miles in my book, but even Huddleston, he came in, he impressed, but then I think he got into the rut of thinking, oh yeah, this is just a lower level than Tottenham. Whereas we want players to come in and say, well, no, you got to match it with Tottenham.
Yeah, exactly right.
And so that mindset starts at the top. Exactly
right. And we've got another big opponent this week, as you alluded to, where we travel to Anfield to play Liverpool. It hasn't been necessarily a happy hunting ground for us, but at the same time, I think we've played there, 4 times in the Premier League. I think we lost 2-0 in our first season under Bruce. We got smashed, was it 6-0 or 7-0 in our second
6-0.
Season under Brown? I think Torres probably got a hat-trick in that game from memory. But other than that, we had the 2-2 draw in our first season where we were actually up 2-0 to start the game. And then the 0-0 draw there 2 seasons ago where, funnily enough, we had Jakupovic in goal. And, of course, our home record against them has actually been quite impressive. We've had 2 wins against them in both of our seasons under Bruce. So it'll be an interesting game. I mean, Liverpool don't strike me with the same sort of fear as a Chelsea, a United, an Arsenal, or even a Man City as well would strike me, because we have such terrible records against those sides. we actually have a decent record against Liverpool in recent times. So I'll start with you, Brad. How do you see this game panning out?
Yeah, look, I suppose I would normally be exactly the same as you there, Alex. I think I'd be more optimistic about a Liverpool than say a Chelsea or an Arsenal or a Man City or so on. But I just have this feeling that Liverpool will be well structured and pretty well rehearsed by the time we get there. Not that they're not normally, but in the past, one of those games we did win was at home a few years back when Suarez basically got bullied off the ball and had no impact, and he was pretty much their only avenue to goal that night, whereas I think they've got a bit more dimension about them now. But having said that, Phelan seems to be, and it might have been even Curtis Davies that said something about Phelan's preparation is pretty unique. Well, more unique than what Bruce used to provide. And it wouldn't surprise me if Phelan's got a few ideas up his sleeve of how we can break them down. Like you said before, he wants to win games. He doesn't want to go to lose or even just hang on. He really wants to go and play football. And probably the only thing is going to be the structural setup. Do we keep that same formation or do we have to try something different? The formation seems to work pretty well with the players we've got, but maybe he might try something with Mason coming in or something like that.
I think I have to agree with you. I don't think Liverpool strike me with the same fear factor that perhaps some of the other big teams do. Mind you, they were very impressive against Chelsea. But again, we obviously saw how they turned up at Burnley when they travelled to Liverpool.
That's the way I like to look at it. I mean, if they seem to struggle against the really crap clubs, so is it a compliment or a negative if they smash us? I mean, if they smash us, maybe we're actually doing all right.
I feel it's one of those games that could go either way. It depends on what Liverpool dish up and how they turn up on the day. But I think there still does seem to be an aura of confidence around the place, and I think given a positive result against Stoke, I think we could go there with pretty high expectations that we might be able to turn them over.
And do we see? I mean, we'll assume that a couple of the new signings will start against Stoke, which is actually in the morning our time. I thought it was this morning, but got my dates mixed up there. I mean, if we assume that some of the new signings start in that game, do we see that as a chance for them to earn a place in the starting 11 on Saturday, or do we see Phelan maybe going with an unchanged 11 again? Because as much as someone like a Myler or Diamande might shift out of the side for some of the newer signings, they're players who we can rely on and have had pretty decent form over the last few weeks, and especially someone like a Myler who can really help to break down passing games, and Liverpool obviously would thrive with a sort of pressing passing game, and if we can sort of take the ball off them and launch sort of counter-attacks, it can be quite effective, and Myler and Huddleston and Livermore and so on might actually be quite effective at doing that.
Now, I think you probably the thing that probably came out of last week was we really looked like we could match it. It was more so our weakness or mistake that cost us. And this week, probably Phelan doesn't actually have to tinker with the side much at all, other than to point out where Arsenal got us last week was in a lot of cases from our own mistake. Sure, they're good players, they've got money to burn, that's fine. But even if you go back to some of the play in that first half, Myler has been fantastic at really sitting behind the ball and negating. But a couple of times he got carried away with being a passer, holding the ball a bit too long. Really against Liverpool, all we've got to do is take some of those weaknesses out and we're going to be on par for periods of the game. And that's all we've got to do. I don't think Phelan's probably not going to be a guy anyway who's going to throw anyone out of that first 11 unless he's really genuine concerned that they're a weakness going into this game. And so far, these guys have proved they're not.
So then I guess we'll round it off, and I'll start with you, Logan, and sort of ask you, what would be your dream headline out of the weekend, and then what would be your worst nightmare?
The dream headline would be Hernandez scores a winner. I'll take 1-0 at the death. Probably the biggest nightmare or nightmare scenario. I'm not too sure. I think probably another 4-0, 4-1 drubbing might do something to sink the spirits in the camp if we were to be on the receiving end of a battering.
Yeah. And how about you, Brad?
Oh, look, I think the dream headline would probably be just a win, preferably early in the game, so to help my nerves in the second half. But probably the nightmare for me, mate, I still believe the results are results. It's just about the players we've got. I think if Davies went down injured, we've lost, 2 centre-halves effectively in a matter of weeks. And then, Maguire, we know Maguire's quality, but Maguire did look like he was a lot slower than normal last week, and that worried me a little bit if he's our next in line, at the moment anyway.
Well, I think the good news is I think the red card for Liverpool is only a 1 game, which means it can be kind of absorbed in the League Cup, which is a good news. But yeah, I mean,
Andy.
That is one we haven't really touched on, and we can touch on quickly before the end, is Maguire and whether he deserves to hold his place against Liverpool, because he's the sort of guy I feel where when he gets a run of games, he actually he does take a while to come up to speed and get used to the speed of the game, but there were stretches last season when he was in the side for Dawson or Davies or whoever was injured, where we actually went on pretty decent runs, and he'd be dropped when one of those players would return, and a few weeks later our results would dip off as well. So he seems to be he seems to be a form player basically. Yeah,
I agree, and probably the one thing I always like when you're playing against these teams that are sort of estimated to finish in the top 6 is if you've got someone who's prepared to, lean the body in a bit. It keeps those sort of more higher paid, nimble, slightly precious strikers on their toes. And we all know that Maguire's a brute of a man, but he can play a ball and he doesn't look out of place. It's really for me whether or not he's got 90 minutes in him to be able to, and I'm certainly not thinking that Liverpool are above Arsenal from a level or an intensity, but he's still going to have to put in a big shift to play in that role this week, and Phelan probably is going to think he's not quite ready.
And I think it was our friends over at Amber Nectar have coined the nickname for him of Hazmat, which I find quite amusingly appropriate for him. Logan, do you reckon he's earned his start against Liverpool?
I think he has to start, and I wouldn't have any dramas with him starting. I think you've hit the nail on the head before. He is a player that seems to thrive on playing back-to-back games, and again, this early on in the season, if he can get a few consecutive games under his belt, he might start to put some pressure on when Dawson returns, and depending on where Livermore ends up playing as well for that second central defender spot.
I think at this rate I should be nicknamed the Hammer. I've hit the nail on the head so many times tonight. Thank you so much both for joining me. Thanks, Logan.
Not a problem.
And thanks very much, Brad.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Logan.
No worries. And thanks, everyone, for listening in to another edition. We'll be back same time next week, where hopefully we've had a bit of a positive result for a change after the last few weeks. So until then, come on, City. You've been listening to the official Hull City Australia podcast. For more discussion, join us on Facebook in the Hull City AFC Australian Supporters Group, or follow us on Twitter at Hull City AFC Oz. The music was created by Amber and Black.
There's no turning back 'cause you're out.